This is a non-biased look at the ancient texts of the Bible that have accurately predicted the future multiple times. This is presented without a religious agenda and completely independent of any religious doctrine. In the previous video, we looked at Jesus' timeline in Matthew 24 and found out that we are currently in the end time. To watch that video, you can click on the link right here on your screen. And in this video, we're going to look at the sequence of events that Jesus said will occur in the time of the end, specifically the abomination of desolation that he said will happen first in the end time, then those in Judea fleeing into the mountains, followed by the Great Tribulation. So we're going to put that sequence on this table right here. So first, the abomination of desolation will occur, then flee into the mountains, then Great Tribulation. And Jesus referred us to the book of Daniel in order to understand this. He said in verse 15, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, whoever reads, let them understand. So when we search the book of Daniel, we find the word abomination 3 times in chapter 9, chapter 11, and chapter 12. And since Jesus said the abomination of desolation is something that will stand in the holy place, we want to find something that matches that context. So Daniel 9 says, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. So there's no mention of the abomination standing or being set up in chapter 9, but there is mention of that in Daniel 11. It says, they shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And then in Daniel 12, it goes further and says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So we're going to talk about Daniel 12 first, because it parallels Jesus' end time sequence in Matthew 24. In Daniel 12, verse 1, it says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation even at that same time, and at that time thy people shall be delivered. So Daniel 12 gives the same sequence Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24. Michael stands up for the people, and they are delivered at the time of the tribulation. So notice this word in Daniel that was translated as trouble also literally means tribulation. So the sentence, and there shall be a time of tribulation, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time, is also repeated in Matthew 24, verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be. So when Jesus referred us to Daniel here in verse 15, he seemed to have been specifically pointing to Daniel chapter 12, which perfectly parallels what he said and gives us another detail about this tribulation. It asks in verse 6, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? In other words, how long will it be until the end of the tribulation? And the answer is in verse 7, it shall be for a time, times and a half. So when Jesus referred us to Daniel, he was referring us to the actual length of the tribulation, a time, times, and half a time. And this time period is also mentioned in Revelation chapter 12. Verse 14 says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. So in Revelation 12, the woman flies into the wilderness for a time, times, and half a time, which we know from Daniel 12 is the length of the tribulation. And this confirms the woman is in the wilderness during the tribulation. But the escape of the woman is also mentioned in verse 6 of Revelation 12. It says, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So the woman is in the wilderness for 1,260 days. 1 score is 20 and 3 scores 60. So this time period of 1,260 days is 1,260 days. So the escape of the woman described in Revelation 12 lasts for 1260 days, which is also known as a time, times, and half a time. And this is confirming for us also that the tribulation period is also 1260 days. And we know 1260 days is approximately 3.5 years. So 1260 days equals 3.5 years, which according to Revelation 12 is also referred to as a time, times, and half a time. Therefore, a time seems to be 1 year, times is 2 years, and half a time is half a year, for a total of 3.5 years. So the woman is in the wilderness for 1260 days, or 3.5 years, and then right after that in verse 7 it says, and there was war in heaven. So the sequence in Revelation 12 is similar to Daniel 12 and Matthew 24. She flees into the wilderness for 1260 days, or 3.5 years, and then a war starts. But Revelation 12 also adds more details to this. The first thing mentioned in Revelation 12 is a sign in heaven, and that's in verse 1. There appeared a great wonder in heaven. That word wonder also means sign. So the sign in heaven happens first in Revelation 12, and that is in verses 1 through 5. Then the next thing is the woman flees into the wilderness in verse 6, and then after that there's a war in heaven. That's verse 7. So when we plug Revelation 12 into Daniel 12 and Matthew 24, we end up with a basic timeline. First, the abomination of desolation will occur and a sign will appear in heaven. Then the delivery or fleeing into the mountains or wilderness, and then the tribulation and war in heaven. But in a previous video, we charted Revelation 12, and we found out there are actually 2 escapes of the woman. One before the dragon is cast to earth, and another after the dragon is cast to earth. So the first escape lasts 1260 days, and that time period can also be years, because we're told in Ezekiel 4 that each day represents a year. And that's also confirmed in Numbers 14, each day for a year. So the sequence in Revelation 12 is first the sign happens in heaven, then the woman escapes for 1260 days or years, then the war in heaven starts and ends when the dragon is cast to earth, then the dragon persecutes the woman on earth, then the woman escapes for a time, times, and half a time, which is the 3.5 years that the dragon goes after the remnant. So both of these time periods in Revelation 12 correspond to Daniel's time of trouble. But notice the second one is a short time, because it says in verse 12 that after the dragon is cast to earth, it knows it only has a short time. So this second time of trouble should be shorter than the first. It's a time, times, and half a time, in other words, 3.5 years. But this first time period can be 1260 years, which is much longer. So Revelation 12 seems to be telling us that there will be a time of trouble lasting 1260 years prior to the final tribulation of 3.5 years. And this also seems to be confirmed in Revelation 11. In a previous video, we charted this chapter and found out that the multitude is walking the holy city in heaven for 42 months, and 42 months also equals 3.5 years. Then we're told the 2 witnesses are on the earth for 1260 days, and at the end of that time period, they are killed and lie unburied for 3.5 days. So we know days can also be years. So this seems to confirm that the 3.5 year tribulation will occur after a period of 1260 years. We also know the woman in Revelation 12 represents the multitude of all nations, and months in the text are literally months. As far as I know, they do not represent anything else. So the 42 months of the multitude walking the holy city in heaven can only refer to one time period, and that is 3.5 years. So this time period laid out in Revelation chapters 11 and 12 indicate that the 3.5 years or 42 months will occur after a tribulation of 1260 years. So if we plug this into our chart, it looks like this. First, we have the abomination of desolation and the sign in heaven. It doesn't specify which one happens first, only that they both happen before the 1260 years of trouble when the witnesses walk the earth and the multitude flee into the wilderness. Then next, the war in heaven and the dragon cast to the earth. Then the dragon persecutes the multitude, and then the multitude flies into heaven and walks the true holy city for 42 months or 3.5 years during the final tribulation, while the two witnesses lie unburied and the dragon goes after the remnant. So this sequence also seems to have been confirmed by Jesus himself in Luke 12, because in verse 37 he says, "Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he comes, shall find watching." And then in verse 38 it says, "And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants." So Jesus indicates that there will be 3 watches for his coming. In other words, 3 watches on his timeline. And it's also interesting that Jesus' timeline is laid out in 3 different chapters of the gospel: Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And in the sequence of end time events, these chapters have 3 different names for the tribulation period. In Matthew 24, it's called the Great Tribulation. In Mark 13, it's called the Affliction. And in Luke 21, it's called the Days of Vengeance. So when we compare the 3, we can see the differences between these times of trouble. For example, both Matthew and Mark say the abomination of desolation will occur before those in Judea flee into the mountains, but Luke 21 doesn't mention the abomination of desolation at all. Instead, Luke 21 gives the signal that the time of trouble is about to start when Jerusalem is compassed with or surrounded by armies. And then also notice that both Matthew and Mark say when they flee to the mountains, those on the rooftop will not come down off their roof first. And that riddle also appears in Luke 17 and verse 31. It says, "Whoever is on the roof of their house in that day will not come down off their roof before they flee, because they will be taken in one night or in one day." In other words, they will be taken off their roof. And the only way that can happen is if they fly. And then in verse 37, Jesus says they will be taken to where the eagles are gathered together. And that's a reference right back to Revelation 12, verse 14, which says, "The woman will be carried by the wings of an eagle that she might fly into the wilderness." So the riddle you see here in green in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 that says those on the rooftop will not come down first before they escape to the mountains, that's code phrase that means they will fly. So they will be taken by flight to where the eagles are gathered together. But the riddle here in green that alludes to flight in Matthew and Mark does not occur in Luke 21, because Luke 21 is describing the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, when the literal city of Jerusalem was surrounded by the Roman army and some of the people escaped on foot into the mountains. So that account was recorded by the Roman Jewish historian Josephus. So Jesus indicates there will be 3 times of trouble: the days of vengeance, the affliction, and the great tribulation. We know the days of vengeance in Luke 21 occurred in 70 CE at the siege of Jerusalem. So the next time of trouble after that should have started a 1260-year period that will be followed by the final 3.5-year tribulation. So in the next video, we'll look at the fulfillment of the first 1260-year period and how that relates to the final 3.5-year tribulation and the predicted asteroid impact. So if you have any questions about anything we've talked about in this video, check the links below or click on the link to the playlist right here on your screen. And if you like this video and want this research to continue, please consider offering support, because I can't do this without your help. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who makes these presentations possible. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you next week.